Today we talk mental toughness with Dr. Jason Selk, up next on the All Things Risk podcast. Welcome back to the All Things Risk podcast. I'm Ben Catania, your host. If you're new to the show, we cover risk and uncertainty across all walks of life. And today we have a bit of a shorter episode than our normal format. Our guest had a smaller window to speak to me, and it's a very practical conversation with some very valuable tools that I think complement our previous episode with Mike Clark on mental training. Today, we speak to Dr. Jason Selk. Jason is a top performance coach based in the USA, one of the best in his field, and he's worked with Olympic and professional athletes as well as leaders of large organizations, and he was also the sports psychologist for the St. Louis Cardinals baseball team when they won the World Series in 2006 and again in 2011. That is the championship of Major League Baseball. For those of you new to that, he trains people and teams to develop mental toughness for success. He's written a number of books. Most relevant to this conversation are Minute Toughness and Executive Toughness. If you've listened to previous episodes of our show, you will know that one of the things I'm keen on, because it's borne out in the science as well as features in the insights of many of our guests, it is that to deal with, let alone embrace uncertainty, how we think is just as important as what we think. And to that end, and as you'll hear from Jason, the how of thinking can be trained. And like any form of training, when you do it more often, the better you get at it. So this episode can be thought of perhaps as a little mental training session. Jason gives us his background and a bit of theory, but the crux of this one is about the mental workout that Jason developed around mental toughness that he uses with his clients. It's incredibly useful, particularly now. Jason also shares insights on how to deal with the uncertainty surrounding COVID-19 as well as other thoughts. So let's get into mental toughness with Dr. Jason Selk. Jason, welcome to the All Things Risk podcast. This is an absolute pleasure to have you on. Thank you for joining us. And this is an appropriate time to talk about mental training and toughness.
Yeah, to say the least. Thanks for having me, Ben. I'm glad to be with you today.
So to just begin with, it would be great if you could position yourself for my listeners, give your background and how you got into the world of sports psychology and mental toughness.
Yeah, so from 2006 through 2011, I served as the director of mental training, director of sports psychology for the St. Louis Cardinals, the baseball team. And I was fortunate enough, 2006, my first year, the team, we won a World Series. And then my last year, 2011, we won a World Series. And I got into it. I was one of those rare individuals. I knew really pretty early on in college. It was my first semester. I originally started college as a physical therapy major, and I realized pretty quickly within, 6-8 weeks of being at school in that very first semester that physical therapy wasn't the way to go. I wasn't all that interested in the physical rehabilitation of athletes, but more of the mental side. So I really just early on in my life, I think I was 18 years old at that point, decided this is what I wanted to do. And I was really, really lucky that I chose wisely, and it's been a great fit. And like I said, I've had a lot of success in the sports world. After the Cardinals won the 2011 World Series, I stepped down as director of sports psychology and have since been working more and more in the business world, helping people develop in the business world mental toughness as opposed to working with athletes. But I still have a number of athletes I work with as well.
When you got into sports psychology, did you find that this practice, this field was not as accepted as perhaps it is today? And if so, how did you start to break down some of those obstacles?
No, it's been a pretty easy road for me. Yeah, I think it is maybe more accepted now, but I've been just really lucky that I love the work. And if somebody wants to work with me, wonderful, but I've never been one of these people that worries about the people who don't want to work with me. So, I do think it's more popular, but for me personally, when I started with the Cardinals were very open-minded and embraced what I was talking about very quickly. Even before that, when I was just opening my private practice, I really had more people than I could handle. I've been really, again, one of those fortunate people that really, since my first 2 or 3 years in business, I've been completely sold out. I can't handle all the people wanting to do the work. And I'll take a little credit. I think part of that is the mental training plan I put together that's now known as 10-Minute Toughness. I didn't call it 10-Minute Toughness when I first started my career. I called it Developing Mental Toughness, but McGraw-Hill wanted to change it and put it into a catchy name like 10-Minute Toughness, which is fine with me. But I think part of that, and I would say this for anybody who's wanting to improve their level of success, is you must have a tangible product that will make other people better. And the price you sell it for must be a reasonable price that it won't be difficult for people to get a significant return on the investment. And that really, for me, was, again, what now is called 10-Minute Toughness. So I've had a fairly easy go of it because I do think the product, if you will, the mental training plan, is very effective. At this point, it's very proven, and I think a lot of people still will call it the most effective mental training plan in existence.
Well, I've got your book in front of me, and I love some of the exercises, and I've got my page open to my performance statements, and there's some really good stuff in here. But before we dive into some of that, could you perhaps talk a little bit about the benefits of having a mental practice, mental training? What does it, for people that might be listening to this that are in the corporate space, or maybe they run their own business, what does focusing on mental training, what does that do to one's performance?
I think it's a really important question to ask, one that many people actually don't ask. But you must understand, the brain is a muscle just like the bicep. And if I want my bicep to be strong and effective, if I want that bicep to be as efficient as it possibly can be, I must train for that to happen. I can't just hope that my bicep is strong. I must actually train for it. And obviously, we have physical trainers out there that have taught us the most effective method of, if you want your bicep to be big and strong and effective, these are the exercises you follow. And it's the same thing for the brain, and I think a lot of times people neglect to look at the brain as what it is. And it really is a muscle that, with training, not with pep talks and with hope or with optimism, but with training, you can actually develop. And it's science, it's measurable, there's absolutely no doubt about it. You can't make an intelligent argument against this at this point. But with actual training, the brain can be more effective, more efficient. And I think one of the things I've been fortunate with my education has really been to be on the front end, the cutting edge of understanding what some of those most effective training methods are that will actually cause the type of mental results on performance that people look for.
Mm-hmm. I think that's so important, and there's a lot of good stuff in there that perhaps we can dive into a little bit. I work in the corporate space myself. That's my day job, and I still think there's a lot of catching up to do in both the corporate world and with regard to small businesses, organizations. And I think you're right, but I think people get that intellectually, that the brain is a muscle that needs to be trained, but it's not something that many people set aside and put a deliberate practice into, much as they would, running or going to the gym or something like that.
Agreed. And I think a couple of issues are, number one, there aren't a lot of people out there, surprisingly to me. I developed this mental workout, which I believe is the most effective piece of the mental training. But I developed this back in 1999, 2000. And frankly, Ben, I was shocked that someone hadn't done something like this before me, that somebody hadn't said, and back then I only worked with athletes. So the mental workout I created back in the late 90s, early 2000 was specifically for professional athletes, and it took 3 minutes and 40 seconds to complete. And it was very precise. Any athlete I worked with knew exactly, second by second, what to do in the 3 minutes and 40 seconds. And I think you have a lot of people out there that don't realize short periods of mental training is really all that's required. And I think to get your bicep strong or to, build your cardiovascular endurance takes quite a bit of work. Now, the good news is, and again, my first book was 10-Minute Toughness. And when I wrote that book, that was back in 2006, I worked primarily in the sports world. And I know McGraw-Hill marketed that book as a business book, and they might be mad at me right now saying what I'm about to say, but I didn't write it for people in the business world. In fact, when I started to get a lot of people in the business world reaching out to me because of the popularity of 10-Minute Toughness, that's when I said, okay, I'm a little off on the application of this in the corporate world. And so I spent maybe 2 years doing my research, my homework on creating the equivalent, a mental training program for people in the business world rather than people in the sports world. And that was my second book, Executive Toughness, which actually is of the 4 books I've written. I've actually written 5. One will come out at the very end of this year, but I'll say I've got 4 published right now. But of the 4 that I have published right now, Executive Toughness is actually my favorite. And the reason being, it's a mental training plan for people like you and I, non-professional athletes. And it frankly was the exact training plan I was using for my own coaching. I was kind of coaching myself mentally. And I knew the program I had put together in 10-Minute Toughness was not necessarily what I needed to be doing. One of the big differences, the mental workout I put together for people in my second book, Executive Toughness, is a minute and 40 seconds. And you may have people say, well, why would an athlete need to do 3 minutes and 40 seconds and somebody in the business world only a minute and 40? In the sports world, with the mental work, we really needed to create muscle memory. And you can do it through extended amounts of visualization. We don't need muscle memory in the business world. And so that's why you're able to get through it in a minute and 40 seconds. But again, the idea for most people is, I don't know exactly what to do for mental training, and I'm guessing it's this major commitment. It's not. And, again, there are resources. I would still say Executive Toughness for people in the business world is the most effective mental training plan. And, the resource is there. It's very specific and in very short periods of time. If you did that mental workout, I always just say at minimum 3 days a week, you will undoubtedly see an improvement in your mental strength, in your mental training, your mental toughness. Just like if you went to the gym and worked on those bicep curls 3 days a week, you couldn't stop but having the bicep get stronger. Same thing with the brain. If you follow this 1 minute and 40 second mental workout in Executive Toughness, you will not be able to stop your mind from being more effective, more efficient, more mentally tough.
Could you maybe walk us through some of the elements of that workout?
Yeah, so I'll just, again, I think probably the most important thing to realize is I've written 4 books, and in each of the 4 books, there's a different version of this mental workout. Okay. So again, I think you'll see conceptually that the important piece is have a game plan and follow the game plan. Don't worry about perfection. But if somebody were to say to me, well, I'm just getting started with this, what would you recommend? There's no doubt, and it's the mental workout I personally use every day is the one that I've outlined in Executive Toughness. So I'll just kind of walk you through that format. First thing you want to do is something called the centering breath. You breathe in for 6 seconds, you hold for 2, you breathe out for 7. And what you're doing there is essentially you're getting air into your diaphragm to make sure that the brain is going to work properly. It's quite normal when a person experiences performance that the body reacts by creating something called performance anxiety, performance stress. It's totally normal. Unfortunately, when the heart rate elevates, which is the first symptom of performance anxiety, it sends a message to the brain that the brain begins to disable itself from detailed thinking. It moves into fight or flight. But what you must understand is your brain starts to disable itself from detailed thought. And that's a really bad thing, right, whether you're in high-level athletics or in business world.
Right.
You need the ability to think clearly with detailed thought. And the centering breath, again, you breathe in for 6, you hold for 2, you breathe out for 7, controls the heart rate so that it doesn't elevate and keeps the brain working properly, right? And then the second step of the mental workout is something called a identity statement. An identity statement is really just kind of a personal mantra that gets you more focused on your strengths than on the normal negative self-talk that most people have. An example of an identity statement, I'll give you mine right now. And again, you create your own with whatever details or whatever's important to you. But the key is you create it so that it forces you to think about your strengths as opposed to some of the other negative stuff that more normally would get in there. My identity statement is I outwork and outserve the competition every day. I am the most effective performance coach and speaker in the country. I experience true love as a husband and father. Right now, after I repeat my identity statement to myself, then I'm going to do some visualization. We're going to spend about 60 seconds at most in visualization. And we're going to visualize 2 separate categories. The first category, the first 30 seconds of the visualization, I encourage a person to create something called a vision of self-image. And in that vision of self-image, it's a very detailed visual of who and how I want my life to be 5 years from now. And so again, the first part of that personal highlight reel, the first 30 seconds, I just every day watch a video of where I want my life to be 5 years from now. And it's the same video. It might change, I don't know, every year, every couple of years maybe. It's not necessary. Sometimes you might have the same vision of self-image for a 5-year period of time. But the important thing to know on this is most people don't have that clear vision of where they're trying to go. And those that do, they often forget about it. But watching that vision, first of all, making sure you have it is important. But watching it every day, reminding yourself, that's why you're getting up and going to try so hard each day so you can end up getting there. It's a really important piece of the puzzle. Okay, so that's the first 30 seconds, what I call the vision of self-image, watching 5 years in the future, who and how you want to be, a very detailed visual. And then I want, right up to that, to take another 30 seconds, focused specifically on the upcoming 24 hours. And I really just think to myself, okay, if 5 years from now, I truly want to have that vision of self-image life that I just watched, what do I need to do? What are a couple of the most important things I need to do in the upcoming day if I'm going to be on track for making that happen? And, again, for me, I'm not only concerned with my professional success, but also my personal success. Things like my own personal health and the relationships with my wife and kids. So in that vision of the upcoming day, I don't just see 2 or 3 important wins at work. I also see things like, am I getting my exercise? Am I spending present time with my wife and kids? Am I hitting my lights out curfew, the time I need to get to bed if I'm going to wake up tomorrow at the right time with the energy to get after it like I need to get after it? So again, the 60 seconds of visualization called the personal highlight reel, the first 30 seconds you take and you focus on where you want to be 5 years from now. And then the second 30 seconds is, okay, let me visualize the success I need to have in the upcoming day if I'm going to position myself for that 5-year success. After I do the visualization, then I just repeat the identity statement again, same identity statement. And then I take another centering breath. Again, breathe in for 6, hold for 2, breathe out for 7. In total, it's 1 minute and 40 seconds worth of mental training.
And so just doing this a few times a week will provide huge amounts of benefit.
Yeah, and I always teach people about the 72-hour rule.
Okay.
72-hour rule. And this is with muscle training. It doesn't matter if it's your brain or your bicep, but muscle deterioration begins within 72 hours of your last workout. So, again, if I can get somebody doing the mental workout 3 times a week, it would be hard. Now it's possible, but not likely. It would be hard for 72 hours to pass without having at least one of those mental workouts. So yeah, I always kind of tell people the kind of your bare minimum of greatness is at least 3 times a week getting the mental training. Now, if you want to speed up the process, I know for me, I probably do it, minimums. There might be some weeks where I'm less than this, but for the most part, I'm usually 6-7 days a week. I've gotten in the habit of it, and I know what it does for my life. I kind of enjoy going through it. It's not much work as long as I can remember to do it. So yeah, 3 days a week minimum. If you want to speed up the process, you maybe shoot for once a day.
Yeah, it's 1 minute and 40 seconds. I mean, that's not much of a commitment, is it? So
it's doable, and I think what people have told me over the years is it, without a doubt, is worth the investment of time.
Just a couple of thoughts as you were describing that. One, when you were talking about performance anxiety, I sometimes think that, because I know this for myself, that anxiety doesn't just come from worrying about not doing a good job, but also perhaps being overexcited and also not, and therefore not thinking. So sometimes, that idea of those breaths, that breath that calms you down, also helps with being over excited, perhaps.
Yeah, and I think anxiety, you're really onto something here. That I believe the word anxiety leads people to believe that it's only worry about competition. And you must understand, it's probably a more appropriate word to say just performance biology. I mean, how many people have had the experience, you're on let's use golf as an analogy. You're on the driving range, there's no pressure at all, and you're driving them long and straight. And then you walk 15 feet over to the first tee box, and everything changes. And it's not necessarily that you're terrified or there's large amounts of money or anything at stake. It's just totally normal when your body goes into a performance. And remember, you don't need a bat or a ball or a stage for it to be a performance. Anytime, if you're a salesperson, anytime you pick up the phone call, it's a performance. If you're going into a meeting, if you're running if you're doing a presentation, those are all performances. It's just normal biology to have your heart rate elevate. And unfortunately, as I've said, by allowing the heart rate to elevate, it changes the physical timing of the golf swing, if you will. And it also then, from a business standpoint, when the heart rate elevates, it speeds up the way your brain's working, and you've not trained to do it that way. So you really start to make errors that in otherwise non-pressure situations you wouldn't make.
And the other thought I had as you were describing that, particularly about the vision piece, is that I think the more that you do this, that the vision becomes clearer in your mind, and you can kind of feel the future state a lot more readily. And correct me if I'm wrong, but do you think that the mechanism here then becomes, after you do this, that your subconscious starts to notice and do things more automatically that gets you closer to the vision? Is that kind of what's going on here?
You're clearly a deep thinker, and yes, right on target. I just always say it and think of it this way. Whatever you put energy into, you will improve. Whatever you work on, you will improve. So yes, by the mere fact of just doing that vision of self-image on a regular basis, it will improve. And you will become more specific, and you will work out some details of, oh, I thought I wanted to maybe live in that state, but now that I'm kind of picturing myself there, I'm thinking about the sales tax in that state or the weather of that state. Maybe that's not the state, but maybe this one is. And there's all kinds of nuances that, yes, you're right, your brain will figure out the more you put energy into it. Like I said, the more you work on it, the better you will become.
Mm-hmm. Okay, this is fantastic stuff. I love this kind of stuff, by the way, Jason. This is really useful and helpful. And this episode will likely go out sometime soon, and quite possibly we will still be in the middle of this coronavirus thing. And a lot of listeners around the world are quite worried, and perhaps there's a level of uncertainty now that wasn't there before, or there almost inevitably will be. And that might be around what's going on with my business, my job, the health of a loved one. And I'm curious what your take is on this, and how some of these techniques can be used to help people get through this sort of period and maybe take advantage of it. Maybe there are some good things about the period in which we're now living.
Yeah, I think it's quite obvious to say that everyone in the country, everyone in the world right now is being invited to play the victim. And I think, sadly, most people are accepting that invitation. Right? And I want people to understand this. And I wrote about this in my latest book, Lead Any Team to Win. And there's a chapter on this. It's chapter 6. If there's one takeaway I'd want for people, especially right now, it would be pick up a copy of that book, Lead Any Team to Win, and read chapter 6. You will get the value in that one chapter. I'll guarantee it. Okay, but the title of the chapter is From Victim to Attack. And realize this, that if you're playing victim, if you have adopted a victim mentality, that's the opposite of mental toughness. Mm-hmm. And simply put, though, a person can go from victim mentality to mental toughness, or from victim mentality to attack mentality, simply by picking one thing and getting all over that one thing. All right. Now, let me give you a couple of examples. All right. So I work with a lot of people in the business world, as we've talked. And one of the things, I get a lot of people, there's a lot of financial advisors I work with. Mm-hmm. And the one thing I'm really challenging financial advisors to get all over, so that they start the day on the attack or start the day with mental toughness, is decide what time you need to be arriving to the office. I don't care if you can, with this situation, arrive later, or if you need to arrive earlier. That's your call. But just decide, when do you need to be there? And then the first thing I want you to really work on getting all over is get there on time. And in the first 30 minutes, I want you to make one outgoing, proactive contact to somebody who's going to benefit from hearing from you. Mm-hmm. So, it could be, you could just call that a sales call if you want. I think with financial advisors, they don't really call it that, but just get to the office on time. And in the first 30 minutes, you get all over making that first outbound proactive contact. And I tell you, in a professional stance, just doing that one thing starts people out on attack, and it prevents them from starting out as a victim. It's a really important thing for performance. And then if you also wanted to look at, okay, in our personal lives, because it's kind of a strange situation here where we're all quarantined into our homes. We're spending more time at home now than we ever have. And I'd say, okay, so if you don't want to become a victim to the quarantine, if you will, pick one thing at home that you can get all over. It might be, I haven't done a great job of exercise. Mm-hmm. So maybe you commit to getting a 30-minute walk, or maybe you got a treadmill at the house. Do your run on the treadmill. It could be that you maybe, because you've been working so much and you got kids and they're running 100 miles an hour, that the family hasn't had family dinners very, very much lately. So, maybe what you're going to do is every day, the one thing as a family, you're going to cook, you're going to eat, and you're going to clean up together one meal. And again, it doesn't matter. I don't want the responsibility of telling each person what the one thing should be. My job is to help you just understand psychologically that if you want to be mentally tough in a difficult time like this, choose one thing every day to get all over, and that will be your insurance policy from becoming a victim.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And that, I think, adds a fair bit of two things. One is certainty in one's life and routine, but also when I think you try something new like that you don't know what might happen, and so the opportunities start to open up in a variety of ways. So I think that's really good stuff.
Absolutely. And let me say one thing, Ben, because It doesn't have to be something new. That's one thing.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be something new. It could be something that you've known for years that you should be doing, and this just maybe is your motive to get a little bit more on top of it to prevent yourself from becoming victim.
Great. Okay. That's great stuff. I know you're very short on time here, so before we go, wondering if you could let my listeners know how they can find you, follow you, all of that great stuff.
Yeah, so I think I'm pretty easy to find. Again, my website is Jason Selk. That's S as in Sam, ELK.com. And then we should be pretty easy to find on all the social media outlets, whether it be Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter. But I try to put something relevant. I'm not one of these people that uses those outlets to try to make sales or anything like that. I mean, I've been really lucky. Like I said, I've been sold out, I think, for everything I do for 20 years. So I just really try to, on those outlets, just give one person listening or reading one little piece of advice, one little nugget that day might make it a little bit easier to get through the day. So, if you're looking for maybe that kind of information online, check me out on Twitter or on LinkedIn or on Facebook, and hopefully we'll live up to the expectation. But Ben, I just want to say one more thing. The fact that you're putting energy into putting a podcast out there for people, I know that the goal is to make people better. I hope you're giving yourself credit, and I hope everybody listening is giving themselves credit. I learned this from Coach John Wooden. It's what you learn after you know it all that truly matters. So the fact that you're out there trying to get better, that's a really good thing. Be proud of that and keep honoring that desire to improve.
Brilliant. Jason, I love it. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining me, and wish you all the best.
Ben, thanks for having me.
I hope you guys enjoyed that and found it useful. Maybe give that exercise a try and let me know what you think. As always, we've got links in the show notes as usual, and we'll be back next week with our next episode in what I suppose is a bit of a 3-part mini-series on mental and physiological approaches to uncertainty. I'll leave it at that for now. If you have any comments or suggestions, drop me a note. allthingsrisk@gmail.com is the best place for that. I'd love to hear from you, of course, and as always, we love shares and likes and any ways you can help us spread the word. So we will be back soon. Until then, and as always, don't forget, risk is life.